were shot down. I bailed out once, and the other kids may have gotten wounded, but no, we all finished our tours. And that was really pretty good.
In 1942, while still training in the States, the Wolfpack received the first P-47s. The unit's pilots soon discovered the new plane could be a handful. With some dangerous characteristics, the Thunderbolt could kill unsuspecting or inexperienced pilots with frightening frequency.
If you got going real fast and you approached the speed of sound, the plane started tucking. What do you do when it tucks straight down? Of course, the minute you start feeling that, you pull the power off. And usually by the time you've changed the air a little bit, it'll start coming out and you're all right. I don't know of anyone, no, there were a couple cases where people did not get the power off fast enough and they went right straight into the ground.
The 56 Fighter Group suffered many accidents in the course of working up with the P-47 in 1942. The reason for these accidents are pretty varied, but basically the bottom line was this. The pilots who were flying this new airplane were used to T-6s and BT-13s, fairly benign aircraft, and the P-47 represented a new level of power and performance that they really were frankly ill-equipped to deal with. So it was a tricky plane to fly. By the time they went to Europe, they had lost over a dozen pilots in training, which represents about 10% of the group dying before they even got into combat.
The pilots had to learn that size didn't matter. The P-47 was simply huge, weighing in at over 13,500 pounds when loaded. With a wingspan of 40 feet, a length of 36 feet, and sitting 15 feet off the ground, the P-47 towered over the spindly-legged P-39s and sleek P-40s the 56 had been flying.
The P-47 was probably, what was the heaviest fighter that they built. It weighed 14,000 pounds loaded when you were going to take off on combat.
Despite its size, at high altitude, the men of the 56th discovered their new fighter could outperform every other American aircraft, Army, Air Force, or Navy of its day. Its broad wing gave it tremendous agility at heights other aircraft could hardly maneuver in effectively. Some converts were made right there. Fast and brutish looking, the P-47 was the type of plane that looked like it could get into a toe-to-toe fight, take a beating, but always come out on top. And it could dish out far deadlier punishment than any other World War II fighter. With 8 .50 caliber machine guns, the Thunderbolt's firepower was truly awesome.
I strafed trains one day and tipped a boxcar over on its side, not exploded, just tipped it over from the impact. So tremendous firepower on those 850s.
Clayton Gross, a 354th Fighter Group Mustang ace, recalls being on the receiving end of a P-47 attack when he was mistaken for an ME-109.
P-47s coming in had thought they had 2 109s, and so they picking me off. They shot my canopy off. It was gone. My plane did a snap roll, was involuntary. And so I was still alive, so I did a spin. I went into a spin. I did a recovery and pulled out, and here came the P-47s again, and I rocked my wing frantically, and this guy pulls up alongside of me and goes, "Oh!" and takes off and leaves me there. And I didn't know how badly my plane had been hit. The radio worked, the controls worked. I came back, and the plane had almost 100 holes in it. Some entry, some leaving, but it was like a sieve.
With terrific firepower, excellent high-altitude performance, and an airframe built to withstand massive amounts of damage, the men of the 56th Fighter Group gradually grew to love their P-47 Thunderbolts. By the time the group deployed to England to join the 8th Air Force in early 1943, its pilots were some of the fiercest P-47 advocates in the Army Air Force. When the 56th Fighter Group reached England in January of 1943, its pilots were dismayed to learn that they weren't going to be the first P-47 unit into combat after all. As it turned out, the 4th Fighter Group beat them to the punch. Formed from the famous Eagle Squadron the previous year, the 4th Fighter Group converted to Thunderbolts just a few days before the 56th arrived in England. And here, the love-hate relationship that characterized a pilot's relationship with the P-47 began. The men of Don Blakesley's 4th Fighter Group had been used to light and nimble Spitfires. None of them wanted to part with their Spits, especially not for something as huge and ungainly as the Thunderbolt. As much as the 56th Fighter Group loved their P-47s, the 4th despised theirs. The first combat missions flown by P-47s took place in the spring of 1943. The 8th Air Force had several Thunderbolt groups by then, and the units began flying sweeps over France to get acquainted with air combat.
These early P-47 operations in the fighter sweeps over France were plagued by several difficulties. First of all, this was a new aircraft. It had its fair share of mechanical problems that had to be worked out. Secondly, the American pilots were simply green and inexperienced at this point in the war. And lastly, and probably most significantly, they were up against some of the best German fighter pilots at the time, and therefore some of the best in the world. And they were flying FW-190As and Messerschmitt 109Gs, some of the best fighter aircraft in the world at the time.
Then on April 15th, Tax Day, Uncle Sam finally received payback for all the money invested in the P-47. A squadron from the 4th Fighter Group, while on patrol over France, caught 2 FW-190s in the air and shot them both down. But those would be the only victories the Thunderbolt would have for quite some time. In its first 2 months of combat operations, the 3 P-47 groups flew 2,279 sorties, resulting in 10 German planes claimed as destroyed. In return, 18 47s had been lost, both to enemy fire and by catastrophic engine failure. And the 56th, which had been the biggest supporter of the Thunderbolt, had yet to get its first victory. Finally, on June 12, 1943, the 56th Fighter Group shot down its first plane, an FW-190. That seemed to break the group's bad luck, for on the 13th, pilots from the 56th surprised a formation of FW-190s and blasted 3 of them from the sky without a loss. From then on, the 56th went on a rampage, more than earning the nickname the Wolf Pack.
I had a 109, got a 109 I think in December. We'd chased him from altitude on down, and we were really moving going down. And so I just stayed with him, and then he went into the clouds, so I pulled back up because I knew I'd overrun him and